Hi, I'm Joshua, and I'm an INTP, and first and foremost I would like to say thank you for viewing this video. The topic of this video will be part 2 to my video on INTPs and purpose and meaning. And in part 1 of that video I talked very much about introverted thinking's tendency to be monolithic and single-minded and posing a totalitarian temptation to the INTP, sort of as a Luciferian figure, to draw them to being completely self-reliant and believing that all things will derive and can be pulled from the self, and that there being where they start with their search for meaning within themselves. Now, I think what happens with the INTP is that they come against the world, and the world is constantly trying to rattle them and pull them out of themselves. And also what I mentioned in that video is that an INTP, because of our damp relationship with extroverted sensing and introverted feeling, and the potential antagonistic relationship we can have with extroverted feeling, we lose a great deal, we don't have a great sense of relationship to our creatureliness and to our humanity per se. And that can cause us to present ourselves one-sidedly to the world and can cause a great deal of social angst and dilemma for us. And we will perceive things rather through a philosophical vantage point and not necessarily an ethical or moral one, by way of our lack of being able to commune and feel extroverted sensing and introverted feeling and dealing with extroverted feeling. So our feet get stuck per se, and we don't make much motion in life. We're not necessarily driven to engage with it because our creatureliness is damp. We have an antagonistic relationship with extroverted feeling. The seat of our emotions, the emotions are the seat of motivation, and the seat of our emotions are faint, or can be faint to us. We don't necessarily understand how we feel, so it can be very difficult to get traction going and moving in a direction in life, and it can be hard seeing the point to a lot of things. And so my thought was based on Carl Jung's thinking on the role of the inferior function in one's psyche, being that the inferior function is the mediating figure between the individual and the collective unconscious, between the self and the highest self. And so it's here that I want to start in saying that purpose for any type, purpose for any individual, though this is specifically being geared towards the INTP, is one's self, or one's ego, connecting with their highest self. And I think this is the closest thing you'll get out of any sort of religious talk you'll hear from me, but I think when we're talking about purpose, I can't not talk about the psyche, nor the metaphysical or the irrational elements to what it means to be human, because it is the irrational elements of what it means to be human that even draws us to having this sort of vantage point or need. Like, why do we care about having purpose or meaning? What makes us even believe that it fundamentally exists? And I'm not one to go out there and say that there is any universal purpose or that there is any universal meaning to life per se, but the disavowal of purpose and meaning creates a nihilism and a nihilistic structure in the psyche that's destructive. And I gotta say, from a philosophical standpoint, or at least from a Darwinian standpoint, that an organism wants to live, and the main basis for existence for an organism is to extend its life and to increase life and proliferation. It's that the truth leads to life and lies lead to death, roughly. And that's the closest thing you'll hear out of morality from me. But so when I'm thinking about this, it's to say that the individual will have to think of purpose and meaning from a metaphysical and psychological standpoint. It's why I can get behind Jung's work, because he took the sacred out of the realm of just pure metaphysics and grounded and began grounding it in biology and anthropology, just the material world and sphere, and ultimately in the human mind. Now, it is the basis for purpose that comes out of an individual being able to commune with their highest self. This is where the inferior function comes in, because the inferior function rests as the door to the unconscious for the individual. And for the INTP, that's extroverted feeling. So we have to talk about the door now and really what one's approaching. And it's here that I'd like to talk about the base anthropomorphic elements of extroverted feeling and try to give some light to what it is at bottom, roughly. And so extroverted feeling, at least in how I see it, emotions per se are action and readiness potentials within the body. There are responses to things in the environment. There are also the things that we have base substrates and mechanisms for that lead us in directions that we really can't account for and explain, but that we just find ourselves doing. And what I mean by we find ourselves doing is just, why is it that birds of a feather flock together? Why is it that when people get together in a room, their thoughts and their speaking tend to influence one another and change and morph their ideas and their perspectives in account of them being with other people? It's just that the emotional landscape arises from our creatureliness, or the embodied elements of us, and what it makes, and how that makes us what we are per se as people. And this is where introverted feeling comes from, and this is where extroverted feeling comes from. So one dichotomy of it, because introverted feeling and extroverted feeling are the same things essentially, they just differentiate themselves and go to diverging spectrums, but feeling itself is an embodied phenomena, and it's the governing and directing thing that causes us to act in the environment and causes us to move, per se. But extroverted feeling, in its dichotomy and its existence, tends to be the thing that is concerned with collusion and affiliation. So extroverted feeling, it wants to move things together in the group and affiliate itself with others of its own kind. At bottom, extroverted feeling says that we're all the same. Everybody's the same. We're all the same. And there are differences and variation, but those differences and variations are superficial, and we are essentially the same things. Introverted feeling doesn't say that, obviously. Extroverted feeling, it is concerned chiefly with bringing us together. It's why from extroverted feeling springs forth the meta idea of community, or communism, or com per se, the root word to gather or to be with, to communicate, it's the basis of calm. It's just so much extroverted feeling, and what extroverted feeling is trying to do and bring forth in the environment. The feeling functions, I believe, at bottom are concerned with the maintenance, the proliferation and the creation of life. The feeling functions are life-giving, and they want to bring life into the world. Introverted feeling through meaning and creating meaning by way of the individual, and extroverted feeling by way of support or philanthropy, roughly, in creating communities for the individual to exist in, and by bringing connectivity through philanthropy in the community. And so this is the thing, per se, that the INTP is not naturally privy to. Now, how I want to talk about this is saying that the higher self of the INTP is somewhat of a benevolent, philanthropic entity. By way of submergence between introverted thinking and extroverted thinking and extroverted feeling, I don't know how the thing fits together completely, but it's a Christ-like image, per se. And I borrow that term from Christian theology, obviously, but it's, or the Buddha, the thing that sits as the person or the one or the consciousness to be to strive towards, to the higher thing to move oneself to, or to approximate oneself to. That's what the archetypal INTP or the archetypal self is. But the archetypal INTP or the archetypal self is by way of extroverted feeling. You go through extroverted feeling to find that and to get that. So if one understands that it has something to do with being creating beneficence or being benevolent to some respects, it makes it easier to see and to sort of ideate what that could be and what it is an INTP is trying to approach, because purpose is found through aligning oneself with their higher self. And the striving for extroverted feeling is essentially our pilgrim's progress. It's our saintly walk, and it's everywhere and everything that extroverted feeling, extroverted sensing, and introverted feeling, and every way that they show up in the world, it's where we have the ability to build character, per se, or to establish some sort of not innate virtue that is necessary for the landscape of our psyche, so that we can go out and give to the world whatever it is we are to give by way of our mission, per se. So it's like this. You find out that you're deficient, you go to your basement, and I'll say what I mean about going to your basement a little later. Your basement is extroverted feeling, and you deal with it. You deal with your ineptness to it and with it, but you try to understand it and use it, live it out, and act it out. It's a process of living out extroverted feeling and acting it out, though you don't necessarily do extroverted feeling. And this can be the rub, because it's hard to do, and it's hard to say what one ought to do or ought to be. But it's this idea here that I pull from Jung, is that there is the hero's journey. You have who you are as the individual, and you have your own interest, and you have the things that you care about and you're driven towards. You have your biological nature to you too, though the INTP may not always realize it, but you care about status, you care about sex, you care about love and affiliation to some extent, though you can be very autonomous, these things are innate in all people, and though they act in the background and they're secretly driving you as an individual, you can bring them to the forefront by being conscious of them and actively seeking them out. You actively seek these things out by actively seeking out extroverted feeling. It's like going to what you don't like in the world, per se. Um, for example, for myself, when I say communing with extroverted feeling, alright, I'm not necessarily empathic person, but I do go to soup kitchens and I do volunteer and I do spread goodwill. Even though I'm every much of an atheist, I do things like that. And I don't do things like that because religious or anything like that, but because I am acting out extroverted feeling, because I just think it's extroverted feeling that created all these social programs and institutions and things, and so you need to work in some of those per se to build up the extroverted feeling repertoire in yourself, and actually being able to actually doing those things and just living. I mean, I commune with it. I live it out, and that's how I live it out in a practical way. I also have dreams and things that extroverted feeling comes to me and tells and shows me things, but I'm not, it's like whatever, I'm not going to get into that. My point is, primarily, is that the INTP, you need to understand what extroverted feeling is. You need to understand what parts of it you have jettisoned away from yourself or just thrown and cast off that you thought was unnecessary for whatever reasons or whatever parts that pained you, and that will get you in the door. That's not necessarily where it ends, because part of something that everyone has to understand is in the motif in any good hero story, the hero dies at some point in time, or they usually die. They die and they're revived, or they die and they change into something different. But it's the image of the dying savior. Once you go and commune with extroverted feeling, it's not as if the process is going to be a nice, lovely one. And that's purpose. That's you uncovering purpose there. But if you want a mission and something you are going to do and need to do, you're going to be forced in some way to equip extroverted sensing and introverted feeling. And going and dealing with extroverted sensing and introverted feeling is really hard. At least it was for me. And hopefully this isn't sounding too vague and too general, but I'm talking about things that are psychological in nature. You know what it is you're afraid of, per se. You know what it is that you don't acknowledge and what you ignore about yourself. One, either because they're just too messy to deal with, or they frighten you, but they're there. And I promise you, the things that you ignore and you don't deal with are arrested. Typically, at least for me, they were arrested in extroverted feeling, extroverted sensing, and introverted feeling. Mediating and making your petitions to them, because they're largely unconscious things. They're not a part of the things that you value. So you have to force yourself to acknowledge them and to deal with them. Part of what differentiated me was having an INFP sister, and really dealing with introverted feeling. I mean, I dealt with introverted feeling, and I dated an INFP, and it's like dealing with them, per se, in all relational manner and sort of communing with it. I use that word commune a lot, and it's supposed to say something, but what I need to make sure one understands is that it means to live with and to be around in the way I'm using it. You have to live with the extroverted sensing in you. You have to live with the introverted feeling in you. You have to live with the extroverted feeling in you. It's the extroverted feeling in you that's going to allow you to approach the other functions. It's introverted intuition you're not really going to have a problem with. An extroverted thinking, if you live in America, you got some of it pretty well developed, but if you've had a job and things, but it's like, and you can even understand the necessity of it. But extroverted sensing, it can appear repugnant, and introverted feeling can appear just completely foreign and dangerous. That's the way I can describe it. But they're a part of you, and you need them in your psychic constitution. I have a brown belt in judo and I have a purple belt in jiu-jitsu, so to commune with extroverted sensing and sort of to understand it and live through an embodied lens, and just being in my body and being in time and existing. I did jiu-jitsu and I did judo and I wrestled, so I went through athleticism and martial arts and disciplining myself in that way, and developing a proficient amount of skill and transforming myself through that. An introverted feeling, it was speaking the truth. This can be something that's hard for INTPs, surprisingly, even though we are autonomous. I know for me, it was really hard for me to tell the truth sometimes, because I just wanted to avoid the anxiety of what the truth would cause for me saying something. And introverted feeling, what it did was bring out the honesty in me. And honestly saying things and expressing things. And it's really when you integrate yourself and you find purpose, what you have to do to maintain that space is develop a very strong amount of character. And there is a sense in part and virtue and character that every individual lacks, and I'm not perfect in these regards. It's like I'm still learning. But and when I say purpose, I don't mean any divine or cosmic thing, though one may think about it like that if they so choose, is to say that anything that has purpose is anything that transforms the self or can have some transformative measure in bringing oneself closer to their highest self. And your highest self is contained in the archetype of the INTP. To be the thinker, I know that you could hypothesize and postulate what that would be in a perfect and idealistic manner, to be completely unfettered and uncorrupted by your own desires in the presentation of information, to be for your work to influence people only in a beneficial and benefactory manner, and not to be something irresponsible or pretentious and short-sighted in its creation. I mean, there's a great palette of ideas that you can pull from, and then just because an INTP is a thinker doesn't mean that that necessarily is all that you do. Thinking, and this is what I have learned from integrating extroverted sensing and extroverted thinking, but thinking is the bedrock of doing, or it can be the bedrock to do. Now, I don't do a ton of things other than think, but when I'm really going to do something, I think about it a lot. I think about it way a lot, and something gets done, per se. But it's just to say that your highest self, that's what you're trying to reach towards, because your highest self is going to take you to your mission or your hero's journey. Now, for myself, my mission, well, I'll talk about my hero's journey. For me, the thing that matters to me more than anything is my ingenuity and my creativity. In terms of aggrandizing myself or efficating myself, just not efficating, but in terms of esteeming myself and aggrandizing myself, or lifting myself up to be at a level that I can feel satisfied with as an individual, to be able to face whatever it is that comes against me in the world, and to be able to do whatever it is necessary for me to do in response to what comes out into the world. Because I believe the only thing that exists ultimately is necessity. It's one's need to act, per se, that drives them. So for me, having purpose has a lot to do with an individual's ability to act when necessary. We are what we do, fundamentally. So for me, what matters is my ingenuity and my creativity. So I take in my hero's journey a path of mastery, and I find a discipline and an interest, and that is mathematics, and that's physics, and that's intellectualism for me, and I try to master it. And if one wants to know what I mean by mastery, they can look up Robert Greene's work, and the School of Ideas on YouTube also has a great video. And the reason I look towards mastery is because I ultimately care about creativity. Creativity for me is creating order out of chaos, and that is what it means to create something and make something, and that's sort of, to me, the divine expression of what it means to be a human being, is the ability to generate things and make things. I think that that's what makes us seem anything that is divine. So creativity, to me, is my highest call, and what I strive for, but there's a real religious burden that's placed on me by way of pursuing creativity, insofar as that I need to become a master, or I will never create anything that is even worth being created, or will stand the test of time. Though will live up to any standard that my higher self has, it just won't do it if I don't have the strong character and work ethic to make it happen. And I came to these things by way of research because I read Carl Jung, I read Joseph Campbell, I read Robert Greene, and I've read Nietzsche and a number of philosophers. And it's just to say that you have an innate self, but you have to create a road. You have an innate self, which is your higher self, but you and your ego, you have to create a road towards it. And that road that you create is like a self in of itself, and it's a way of creating self, or adding on top of and transforming the ego or the self that you actively identify with. And that creates a great deal of meaning and purpose, but it's hard. It's hard, and that's what made me reticent to make these videos. One, because I didn't want to sound like a crazy person, and two, that it's a burden. It's very difficult. And you cannot do this, and you should not do this if you're not willing to suffer. Because there's a great deal of suffering that's on this road. And I believe that you can suffer in one of two ways. You can suffer for what you refuse to do and what you refuse to acknowledge, or you can suffer for what you know is right and move towards it. But that's essentially I see it as that, those two dichotomies, those are the only options that I think one has. Now, in terms of mission, I think that everybody does have a unique mission per se that they can create out of life if work is something that has a tremendous amount of meaning to them. And for me, and I think for most INTPs, we care about what we do with our time and what we do with our hands, or essentially what we create. We're thinkers, but we're system creators fundamentally. We create systems. We care about all the conceptual knowledge and ideas and the philosophical things because we want to create things. You only need to care about the universality and the base principles of things if you want the raw material to do something with. We're gathering the ore, we're gathering the copper, we're gathering the iron per se, and we're collecting it up and hoarding it and not sharing it with people because we're going to make something out of it. And that's what I think an INTP does. We make things. We make things that are of an intellectual and conceptual nature, but we make things nonetheless. And that's what one needs to sort of start to generalize, not to generalize, but take that generalization and start to specify it, approximate it, and move it towards where they are. Because I don't know what per se that one's levels of education leads them to, or what one's reading or experiences or emotional landscape or mental disorders or IQ or whatever, what have you, what constitutes your own individual experience. I don't know what that is, but I know very really that you can take that and essentially make a new dance out of it and create a system of understanding or doing or whatever. And that's ultimately the mission, per se. And for me, my purpose, I know, and maybe me explicating it will help one understand to an extent what I mean by all of this. I know that my purpose is to commune with my highest self. I know that has to do with me being philanthropic towards other people. And I know that me as an INTP, what I can do is create a exceptional, far-reaching amount of understanding and skill within a particular domain of interest. I will create things and I will know things to a depth and a level that is staggering at times, and it's these inventions and this understanding that I have to somehow figure out how to morph and give over to the world so that it can benefit them. Any community that I think is important, or any individual that I love, or any friend that I have, it is my role and my job by way of my purpose as an INTP to create the understanding, to create the tool and the model to rectify the field, or take the misplaced understanding and place it in the right house or under the right umbrella. That's what I do. I render things and I rectify things. And it's by way of my love for mathematics and physics that I know, in terms of my mission, is that I want to rectify physics, or at least move physics, because it hasn't moved for about 200 years, and in the last 15 years, I think in 30 and 50 years, we've wasted a good amount of time on theories that don't have promise to them. But I'm not going to talk about that. But I want to be one of the individuals that moves physics back to the direction of life, for it to be life-giving and not stagnated, disastrous water per se, but to keep the flow, the pool moving, and to keep the flow going. It's about keeping this dance going and being life generating. It's like I want to generate life. I want to have that come out from me and be given to others in terms of the things that I create and the things that I do. And I think that all types, they have this to some extent. It just looks different, but life is the point of life. That is the point. But anyways, at least I think that's the point. Now I'm not gonna sit there and sorry. But just from this vantage point, life is the point of life. Do not please don't start philosophical arguments with me in this video. But I'm just getting this out. Anyways, now for that, I know that's my mission, and per se, moving towards how that has to do with the community, because extroverted feeling tells me, and that has one to do with the physics community and the intellectual community, but it's society at large. I'm an American. I'm an American, and I am a product of this country. And because of what Jung tells me, he tells me that I am partly a cultural being, and I am partly a biological being. And the cultural issues that exist in America, I need to think about them and do something about them per se, whether it's write about them or whatever. Now, I'm not political. I don't want to be political at all. But I do know that I do have an idea of the equilibrated state for this Western society, and that is one of secularism. And I want to see a secular society in the world, not one of religious antagonism. I don't want to see that, and I don't want to see the eradication of religion. But I don't want to see religious policies, and I don't want to see anything like that. I want to see secular policies where the only thing that is being questioned and asked is what makes logical sense, and what does the data show, and what decisions are we making based on logic and empiricism. And I want to see that for Western society, and I want to be one of the individuals that moves towards that in my own thought and communication with other people and influencing the other individuals around me, though I'm not going to tell anybody what to think about anything. So what that is specifically entails me to do, I don't know per se, but I do know immediately that I have a great deal of schooling to do, that I have a great deal of responsibility at my helm, and it's for me to do good and be as great as I can in doing these things, and essentially bringing all of the life I can to the areas at which I'm currently in, and to continue to doggedly pursue my education in physics, and making sure that I don't take any shortcuts, that I don't say that this doesn't matter, that I treat everything like it's important or that it has some significance to it, that I don't allow myself to get lazy, even when I don't want to do it, that I don't quit when I get tired, I don't put it off, and I don't take breaks when it doesn't make sense or when it's not necessary. That the way that I rationally and logically police the internal world and put such structure in it, I need to put, and I don't want a ton of it, but I need to put some semblance of that on some semblance of that onto myself in the real world in order to reach and to strive for the highest self that I can reach and strive for. And by way of that, I'm creating meaning and purpose in my life, because I am constantly met and bereft with challenges and deficiencies, and it gives me the opportunity to play the game of dying savior over and over again. And it's not the world I'm saving. I'm not trying to save the world. The world plays a part in terms of me dying, in a sense, metaphorically dying, but it's to say that I'm saving myself, the ego will sabotage itself over and over and over again. You will be your worst enemy if you do not sit there and go down to the basement and sort of integrate the devil or integrate the shadow or what's dark, lost, and has been casted off from yourself. And I'm doing the dying savior to save myself so that I can be of any use and significance to another person and to the individuals that I care about. And I think fundamentally that living out a hero's journey per se, that leaving your sedentary station or the shire at which you are comfortable with, because you know the habits that you've developed up into this point in time, you know the general direction that your biological tendencies have directed you towards, you know what's home for you, but you need to be called out of that into the middle of Middle Earth to do battle and to nearly die over and over again, or to die at times, and then to be brought back so that you can essentially bring order back into the kingdom, which would be your own psyche. So, if that wasn't too crazy, that is my video on INTPs and meaning, and hopefully you found that useful. And if you have any questions, just leave them in the comments, and hopefully none of that was too convoluted. But thank you and have a good day.